Good evening and welcome. My name is Nick Hinch, and I am the Executive Director of the Washington University Political Review. We are Washington University's monthly political magazine, created entirely by undergraduate students. If you are interested in learning more, please join us tomorrow at 7 p.m. on the third floor of the Duck for our weekly meeting. In addition to creating our magazine, we seek to promote political discourse by bringing thought leaders from around the world right here to campus. Tonight, we are pleased to join Student Union and the Assembly Series in presenting former Governor of Utah, presidential candidate, and ambassador to China, Jon Huntsman. To introduce Mr. Huntsman, I would like to welcome Professor Steve Smith to the stage. Professor Smith is the Kate M. Gregg Distinguished Professor of Social Sciences, Professor of Political Science, and the Director of the Murray Wiedenbaum Center on the Economy, Government, and Public Policy here at Washington University. He has authored or co-authored several books on congressional politics and worked on Capitol Hill in numerous capacities. He has served as a Congressional Fellow of the American Political Science Association and as a Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. He also served as an editor of Legislative Studies Quarterly and on the editorial boards of the American Journal of Political Science, Journal of Politics, and Congress and the Presidency. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Steve Smith.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here and to have the Wiedenbaum Center co-sponsor this event with the Gephardt Institute for Public Service and the Washington University Political Review. Thanks for coming out. It's still winter in St. Louis, and sounds like we're going to have a kind of a cold evening. Maybe our last coldest evening of the year. It's a great honor to be here to introduce Governor Huntsman. Back in 2011, early in that year, reporters were beginning to mention Governor Huntsman as a very viable presidential candidate, but they were kind of wondering what to call him. He had been elected governor of Utah twice, 2004 and 2008, had been a very successful and even prominent ambassador to China, though, after he was appointed, after he gave up the governorship in order to take that post, and they weren't quite sure whether to call him ambassador or governor. I think protocol said you're supposed to be called by your highest office, and so it should have been governor, but there were many who were thinking that ambassador was a very nice title. Then the 2011-12 political season came in, and, well, you remember how that went. Michelle Bachmann came in and kind of like this, and she went up like that and then fell down like that, right? Then there was, remember Rick Perry? Kind of like this, and he went up a little higher, fell harder. Herman Cain, like this, and then finally he went up. He was number 3. Newt Gingrich, my twin brother, Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Newt had 2 bumps. One, down, and then... And then there was tonight's speaker. It's true. But of all of those candidates, only one, the reputation of just one of them survived the race, and it's Governor Huntsman. He came out of that contest with a great deal of respect for no one challenged his credentials for the highest office. No one challenged successfully his commitment to the public good, and no one was able to shake his commitment to civility in American politics. So it's a special treat to be able to introduce to the Washington University and St. Louis community Governor Jon Huntsman. Please join me in welcoming him to campus.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. What a great treat to be with you all. And Steve, that was an unforgettable introduction, may I say. And for you, what you can call me is this. How about Your Excellency? For that kind of put down, Your Excellency will do. I try that with my kids. For some reason, I get no respect at home. I try to drive that home. Your Excellency will do. How about, Your Holiness? But that just doesn't sink in very well. John will do. Thank you very much. It is a great honor to be here with you. I've got a couple of thoughts I want to share, and then we're going to open it up for any comments you want to make. But I have some reflections on politics, on your generation, and on China that I just kind of want to get up my chest, and we can kind of get through that. But Steve was kind enough to talk about politics, and before I venture into that milieu, I will say that if I knew anything about the subject matter, Steve, I wouldn't be standing here with you today. I'd be in elective office again. And if I had made my initial aspirations a reality, which was to be a musician, so my grand aspiration was to be a rock musician, which I tried and I didn't succeed in, I wouldn't be here either. I'd be out touring with a band. But I get to be here with you at what is, despite the temperature outside, the hottest university in the country. I have to tell you, this is an awesome place. You can't walk the buildings or the quad out here without getting a sense that there's energy and brain power and quality that's part of this institution. I'm not pandering, folks, because I ain't running for anything, so I can just say what I want to say. But just promise me this. Promise me that you will not ever walk from building to building out there again without stopping and taking it all in and saying, I'm the luckiest student in this whole country to be at this university, to be exposed to good ideas, mentors, and faculty members who are the very best in the world. That's where you are. And it's because of that that the expectations will be enormous in terms of what you will do for your country and for your community going forward. Now, it's okay for some people to escape and shirk their duty in terms of giving back. But for you all, no chance, because you've been given too much. And the expectations will be high that you'll be able to take the energy and the pragmatism and the intelligence of your generation and move forward to bring about a cultural shift that will need to happen in this country. Steve mentioned politics, and let me tell you something about politics. It is true, I did run for president, and for those of you who haven't tried to run for president before, it is a pretty daunting, intimidating, awe-inspiring, exhausting experience. You have to wear the shoes to kind of get a sense of what it's all about. I had gone from the most compartmented job in the United States government, that of being the United States ambassador to China. You speak diplomatese, you speak, in my case, Chinese, you work with 2,000 of the most talented men and women who call themselves diplomats, members of the Foreign Service and beyond, and you do all kinds of work that most Americans will never ever hear about. And it was the most satisfying thing I have ever done. And for those of you thinking about the Foreign Service or helping out your country in a diplomatic post, I want you to think hard about doing just that. And if you want to talk to me about it, I'm happy to engage you in conversation. But you want to know where our best and our brightest go? They go to embassies like in Beijing to serve their country. And they're members of the Foreign Service. And they're members of other departments and agencies. And they do incredible work in promoting and protecting our nation's interests. And I have enormous respect for them. So I went from that confined environment to the most circus-like atmosphere in the world, running for president of the United States, where it's all out there and you're completely exposed and you're part of the rough and tumble of politics that, isn't for the faint-hearted, to be sure. But here's what happened to us. I thought things were going along pretty well. We built up, a pretty good head of steam in New Hampshire, where we ended up taking third place. And, if we had another week, don't they all say that? If we had another week, we would have gone on to place second, which would have been great. But here's the reality of politics when you hit a place like New Hampshire. It's like the business marketplace, where there are expectations on your return, on your performance. And if you don't meet those expectations, you're discounted in the marketplace. And the political marketplace had basically pegged Huntsman at second place in New Hampshire. And we took a third, which didn't quite meet market expectations, so we moved on. And I look back and I say, what could we have done that might have been a little different, that may have changed the outcome? I tried to be honest and forthright about all of the issues that I talked about, and for that, we didn't get a lot of points in the early primary states. But what was interesting is, where I started feeling the effects is there was this guy named Michael Moore, who's a well-known liberal in the United States. And I saw him on television one night, and so did a whole lot of other people. And he said, that Huntsman guy, he's actually a Republican I could vote for one of these days. And I saw our support in Iowa go like this. I thought it was a totally premeditated plan against Huntsman to get people on the airwaves to knock us. And not to be outdone, Bill Clinton gets on television and said, that Huntsman guy, he seems pretty unhidebound. He's actually a Republican I could support one of these days. And I saw South Carolina go right like this. And I said, if only you could have walked in my shoes, you would have seen exactly what we went through. But let me remind you, before we get more into politics, and a couple of thoughts on China, that the mission statement of this school, WashU, the hottest school in the country today, despite the weather outside, your mission statement is to discover, disseminate knowledge and protect the freedom of inquiry. You ought to go read that and reflect on it sometime, because therein lies a very, very important mission statement. Does it have applicability to politics and to service to your country? You bet it does. This nation is thirsty for fixes, for knowledge, and for new ideas that can be infused into the political bloodstream. And you know what? Many of you are going to be part of that generation that will rise up and fix some of our issues. Sometimes you get the feeling that our engines in this country just sort of flame out and we drift a little bit. We're kind of in one of those periods. We've been in a period like that, I think, for a long time. We had an end to the Cold War in 1989. For my party, the Republican Party, the organizing principle was pretty much wrapped around the Cold War philosophy, anti-communism, and it kind of coalesced everybody in a foreign policy and a national security sense. And since 1989, we've been drifting a little bit in terms of any kind of central organizing or coalescing theme. And then we were hit on 9/11. And I think we're still trying to make sense, many of us in this country, about the meaning of 9/11, how it completely transformed our foreign affairs. Involvement in the Middle East. 12 years later, we're just trying to kind of clean up the mess. The way in which we were seen by others in the world, the trillions of dollars spent. And then we had the economic floor completely collapse under us, with Lehman Brothers beginning that process in 2008. We've had some body blows in this country. And I think it's had an impact on the way we see ourselves and the way we see our nation. And I think, genuinely wonder if the American model works. Now, if my grandfather were back, who was a public educator, high school teacher, he would say, we need to put a few points on the board. We need to show once again that the American system is relevant and capable of producing results. So the engines have flamed out a little bit in this country. They'll get restarted, I have no doubt about that, but you feel like you're drifting a little bit. We've had some body blows, and we're trying to get through it. It reminds me a little bit of the story of the British air flight in the early 80s. You aviation historians will remember this one. Boeing 747 took off from London, flying to Sydney, Australia, stopped in my old home in Singapore, refueled, got back up to cruising altitude, and an unprecedented thing in aviation history happened as it started flying over the vast archipelago that is Indonesia, 19,000 different islands, flying over Java, where the day before a volcano had erupted, spewing sulfuric ash into the atmosphere. And as the 747 hit the sulfuric ash, not one, not two, not three, but all four of the engines died, thereby rendering this plane the largest glider in human aviation history, and it started its rapid descent over Java. You can imagine the fear and the fright of those people on board. And in what must have been the masterpiece of British understatement, the captain of the ship, a guy by the name of Moody, got on the PA system as they were descending. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a small problem. We have just lost power to all 4 of our engines, and we are doing our damnedest to get them refired. We hope that this has not caused you any inconvenience." True transcript. Go look it up. And then a remarkable thing happened. They refired not 1, not 2, not 3, but all 4 of the engines. And back up to cruising altitude, and off it went for a safe landing in Sydney, Australia. Well, I can see some people in this audience who are going to be part of the refiring of our nation's engines, because our mechanics are good. The engineering is all good in this country, unlike the British air flight, where it was total mechanical failure. We've had human failure in this country. You see, our leaders have not been able to come around the big issues of the day and to figure out solutions. The simplest of tasks, being able to meet together, Republicans and Democrats, in putting our priorities before them and compromising and negotiating toward an endpoint, like I had to do as governor. I had no choice. There was nowhere to hide. I couldn't point a finger of blame anywhere. I had to get it done. And it was the most liberating position that I've ever had. We can't do that in Washington. And it's breaking the back of this nation. It's been human failure. Our institutions are sound. We have a constitution, for heaven's sake, the longest surviving in the world. And you know what else? There isn't a single issue or problem that doesn't have a solution. Every one of them we talk about has a solution out there, but your generation will need to seek a cultural fix in bringing about a new politics of problem solving in this country. Because we can't go on forever without a budget, for example. 4 years without a budget. I guess we had some movement just a couple of months ago. The largest economy in the world, 19% of the world's GDP, $16–17 trillion in size. We can't even get our act together enough to get a budget. What gives? When your greatest impediment to growth is your Congress, give me a break. Something has to change. So I just had a couple of thoughts I wanted to leave behind for you to think about as you prepare to assume your roles of responsibility on the national stage. And I don't care whether you're a doctor or a lawyer, you get into public service, wherever you happen to go, your communities will need you, your talent, your intelligence, and your framing of the issues. But here's where we are. We need to maximize our democracy. The heartbreak for me as governor, when I looked at the turnout among young people, which was frightening as I looked at the numbers, was that more and more people just peeled away from their politicals. They just didn't show up to vote. Obviously, they figured that the system was rigged and their vote and their voice didn't much matter anymore. So they didn't participate. It's rigged against them. Too much in the way of barriers. That's not acceptable, my friends. Becoming detached from your political system is not acceptable. We must work to maximize our democracy, and we must move toward some structural changes that will enhance trust and believability in the people who represent all of us. Number one, you stand on the debate stage when you're running for President of the United States, and you see an interesting thing. This nation of 325 million people. We have innovators, entrepreneurs, great professors, leaders in higher ed, great moms and dads, community leaders, entrepreneurs. We have it all in this country. I can compare and contrast because I've lived overseas 4 times, and I love the mix that we have in this country. But very few people are willing to step in the arena. For all the reasons that come to mind. It's painful, it's invasive. Your reputation can easily be shot. But here's where we are. You stand on the debate stage, running for the highest office in the land, in arguably the most consequential country in the world. And on the debate stage, you count about 5 other people who are doing the same thing. I don't need to mention their names. Steve already mentioned a couple of them. And you take inventory of those who are willing to run for president, and you say, I'm sorry, but this is the best we can do? I mean, the barriers to entry are pretty damn low in this business. We need a few more people to step up and get involved, which is a clarion call to all of you to not be shy. Step in the air. You have a choice. You can sit on the sidelines. You can be a pundit. You can be a blogger. You can be a complainer like everybody wants to be these days. Seems that everybody's got something to spin on television. But very few people want to step in the arena. I saw it firsthand. You can count on one hand the number of people who actually want to get involved at that level and actually fight it out. It's tough. We've got to somehow get more circularity in the system. Number 2, I don't know about you, but I came to find through my campaign experience that the way in which we finance campaigns is a joke. We have these things called super PACs. So some guy can drop, $50 million in your account overnight, and we call that democracy. And we call that, individual thought, going back to Buckley Vallejo, 71, 72. The way we finance campaigns, folks, in this country is an abomination. And we can either sit around and just sort of let it play out and accept it the way it is. And I know the hurdles are high, believe me. When the Supreme Court comes in and makes the decision they did, it's going to take some real work among the American people to get us to some level of sanity. But we are not there, and this is a huge impediment to maximizing our democracy. Number 3, come to find as governor that every 10 years they do a decennial census taking of your state, and they give you the numbers. You either add population or you were diminished in population. We in Utah were the fastest growing state in America for a while. We had unemployment at 2.5%, jobs everywhere, people coming from all corners to seek opportunity. You give the decennial census numbers to your legislature, and they go about carving out geography called congressional districts for the new district that you've been given. And I'll be darned if some of those borders around those congressional districts don't look a little bit like the border between India and Pakistan circa 1947. There's no rhyme or reason for the way that some borders are made, and they cause political conflict and strife the way that they're cut. So we wake up to the reality today that we are 70%, when you look at all the congressional districts, 70% red and blue. Fox News, MSNBC, Republican, Democrat. And most Americans are saying, what has happened to us? How is it that the primary is more important than the general election? Everybody's worried today about being primaried. So the goofy behavior of campaigns is now stretched that much further into politics, because you got to make sure you do the right thing in the run-up to the primary so that you're not primaried. The general election is a given. Given how these congressional districts have been drawn, it's the primary. We somehow, some way, and I'm encouraged that some states are actually moving toward an independent redistricting commission. I advocated and put forward such an idea in my state, and it got thrown right back to me by the legislature, who wanted nothing to do with it. But guess what? I'd say 90% of the people in my state were with me on it. Right on. We know that something's broken with the system. We'd like to have an independent redistricting commission too, but the barriers are high. And we've got to somehow frame this conversation in ways that speak to maximizing our democracy, enhancing and increasing turnout. That's going to be the way in which we strengthen this country longer term. Finally, and it's been around for a long time, I've been on both sides of this issue, but I have to tell you that term limits for Congress would be a really good thing. Now, why do I say that? I term limited myself when I was governor. I said, listen, if I do the job right, nobody's going to like me after 2 terms. That's just the way it should be if you're actually doing your job. Come to find that, 1972, 4% of members of Congress leaving that institution, Steve will know these numbers as well, went into the lobbying profession. 4%, 1972. Today, 50 go through the revolving door into the lobbying profession. So, gee, if you hang around a little longer, if you chair an extra commission or committee, you expand your Rolodex, that's going to add some value to what it is you do. And there's this thing called incumbency that grows very deep roots, and pretty soon, nobody wants to leave. So here's where we are as I wrap up this part of the comments that I want to share with you. 1982, when you look at the House of Representatives based on voting records, the number of seats that fell between the most conservative Democrat and the most liberal Republican, 344 out of 435. 344, you know, we had the John Danforth of the world who are actually in the body, getting things done. You know, the essential lubricant in the middle that took from right and left and synthesized the ideas into doable, acceptable public policy and legislation. Today, there aren't 344, there are 11 and falling. And in the Senate, so far as I can tell, Steve, there are 0. 0 left. So in 1982, centrists, as defined by those whose voting records were somewhere near the middle of their parties, 79% of the House of Representatives. Today, 2.5%. So enough of that. Let me just leave you with this thought before we move on to a little bit on China. Let me remind you again, I don't want to put too much of a burden and a responsibility on the shoulders of you students, but I feel a little guilty because my generation is passing on to you some unresolved issues that we should have had the courage to change during our years in power. Maybe we still have some left, I don't know. But your optimism and your energy will be absolutely essential in creating a cultural shift in politics. Don't get cynical and don't get detached and don't be an observer on the sideline who chooses just to watch all of this play out. So having said that, let me tell you something else about this country. I've never been more optimistic about the future when I look at all that we have going for ourselves, because we have some remarkable strengths. And sometimes you need to view this country from 10,000 miles away, as I've been able to do, living in Asia, most recently China, to really understand what some of our core strengths are. We forget them sometimes, and they're still around. So what is it that leaders abroad envy about the United States? Some of you come from other countries, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I can't tell you how many times I heard this one. The way that America assimilates diversity and makes it work. Just stop to think about that for a moment as you ponder the conflict, chaos, and confusion in the rest of the world. You know, it isn't supposed to just work like that. But for whatever reason, it works in this country. We open our doors, we accept in diversity. People become a full shareholder in the affairs of this country, and we make it all work in a stable and practical and economically energetic way. Number 2, we still remain the most innovative nation on earth. And just when you think the doors of economic expansion are about to close, something happens. And when I tell my friends abroad, you know, we're trying to figure out how to gauge their economic system around job enhancement and economic growth, I say, well, let's look at Steve Jobs, Larry Ellison, Bill Gates, Zuckerberg, Michael Dell, the largest job creators in the last generation. Not one of them has a college degree. They made it work through hard work, innovation, access to capital, access to talent, and there's something just highly unusual about how this system functions. We need to bottle it up and keep it. Number 3, we have rule of law, which you don't much come to appreciate until you're somewhere else. And you look back on how this system works for the most, despite our flaws, and despite the number of times we trip and bruise ourselves. As Alexis de Tocqueville used to say, America is a great nation, not because the people are great, but because we have the ability to repair our faults. And I think that still is something very true about this country. Number 4, our local governments, by and large, are still examples of bipartisan problem solving. So the infections of Capitol Hill have not necessarily spilled over in a corrosive way to all of the state and local and county governments. By and large, and there are exceptions to the rule, they still make things happen. 5, we are on the cusp in this country of a new wave of globalization. And it's not the kind of globalization that you might think. It's a remake, a comeback of our manufacturing base. So I see it as a director of Ford Motor Company. I see it as a director of Caterpillar Corporation, which makes big yellow tractors. And if you had told me that we'd be closing down a manufacturing plant in Asia and moving it here to the United States, I would have called you crazy. If you had told me a few years ago that we would be talking about energy self-sufficiency in this country in the coming decade, I would have called you nuts. That's exactly where we are. And we're now beginning to have debates around export policies. Whoever thought we'd be exporting our energy? We've had $300 billion a year of our money leave our shores in the name of imported oil. And here that whole equation is being reversed. Now, we have a thing called structural unemployment in our economy today that's going to have to be addressed because it's a serious and nagging problem that is going to have to be worked on. We've become more efficient. Companies have cleaned up the way in which they operate, and they've left a lot of people behind. For the investors and the owners, they're doing just great. But for a lot of other people, it's a very, very difficult set of circumstances. 6th and finally, and you all know this, because I just met one young student who's going off to work for Teach for America as soon as she graduates, and I thought, this says everything I need to know about your generation. We are still a service-minded, patriotic nation. I mentioned the Foreign Service. I can't tell you how many hundreds of Peace Corps volunteers I was able to swear in as U.S. Ambassador to China who are wandering through rural parts, small villages, courageous public servants, doing what only Americans can do. We still have that ability. But we must keep our eye on the big issues that will determine our destiny in the 21st century. And we must prove that the American model still is able to yield results, as my grandfather would have said. Let me turn to China just for a few moments. Why China? Because I think in your generation, I think at the end of the century, when the history books are written, what are the big stories of the 21st century going to be? Well, I suspect that some are going to be around the march of technology and how it puts stresses and strains on our public policy capabilities, on our sense of morality. I think biotechnology, the conquering of human disease and the extension of human life, like we've seen the last 100 years, will advance so far beyond what any of us could conceive of today. Much of the good work is happening right at this university, by the way. And I chair a cancer institute in my spare time, so I see the work of genomics and how that is transforming the landscape. But I do believe one of the major stories of the 21st century will be the rise of China and how the world responded. Did the world respond in ways that spoke to stability and peace and prosperity? Or did the world respond in ways that resulted in war and conflict? That's the chapter that hasn't been written. And that will be the chapter that you all will be part of writing. Because you see, there's this phenomenon that will be taking place over the next couple of decades called a shift in global order. The United States will remain the most prominent, resilient, creative economy on earth with probably, arguably, the best quality of life. And bumping up against the United States will be China, who at some point over the next decade will probably surpass us in terms of sheer output, sheer economic output, and it will cause fear and consternation and concern among the American people. who will feel that we're about to be relegated to second place. And if you look historically at shifting global orders, whenever someone at the top has been bumped up against, it sometimes results in war and conflict that lasts many years, with a lot of people who die as a result. I mean, I take you back to 1914, 1939 is more recent examples. That chapter has yet to be written, and it will be a very important story, and one that you all will be part of. So is it important to somehow get a sense of what China is all about, where it's going, where we're going, and the implications for this relationship, the most important of the 21st century? There's no question about it. So a couple of things I want you to remember when you walk out the door. Number one, we are seeing even this year the rise of the fifth generation of China's leaders. A man named Xi Jinping, 60 years old, a former provincial governor in provinces like Fujian and Zhejiang. Does he understand economics and trade and investment? Of course he does. He has run provinces that if you broke them out of China, based on population and GDP alone, they'd be among the largest and most prosperous countries in the world. So he now assumes the top spot. What gives him his power in China? So let me just explain the fifth generation part. So we had Mao Zedong from 1949 on. We had Deng Xiaoping. We had Jiang Zemin. We had Hu Jintao. And now Xi Jinping, fifth generation. So the fifth generation I would describe as mostly 50s, early 60s, well exposed to the world, well educated, technocratic, very savvy in terms of their understanding and reading of the United States. I try to find counterparts in our own government here in the United States who read China as well as they read us. And I'm sometimes hard-pressed to find it. And that will have implications at the negotiating table right off the bat. Because when you sit down with China for negotiations, as I've done either as a diplomat or a trade negotiator, you have on one side of the table, on China's side, arguably some of the best long-term strategic thinkers in the world. And on the American side, you have arguably some of the best short-term tactical thinkers in the world. And there's a gap that emerges between the two. Because we want to know what China can do in terms of opening markets in 3 months. And China wants to know what our strategy for the Asia-Pacific region is going to be over the next 20 years. And we're ill-equipped to deliver for the demands of either side. But Xi Jinping is now off and running. He rose at the 18th Party Congress about a year and a half ago. He'll be in for 10 years. So if it's a name you're not familiar with at a university like this, please do your homework. He will be reelected, so to speak, reappointed at the 19th Party Congress, probably midway through the decade, and he'll be there for another 5 years beyond that, so 10 years total. What are his priorities? So Xi Jinping wakes up every morning, and he says, we have some challenges in this country of 1.3 billion people. We are going from an old growth model which stressed investment-led exports, from which they derived enormous foreign currency, to more of a consumption model, with all kinds of challenges that are associated with that transformation. He looks at the landscape and he says, we've got to do something about the people from the rural areas who are increasingly moving into the city centers. So try this on for size. President Obama's first visit to China when I was there as ambassador. We had a meeting with a guy named Wen Jiabao, who was then the premier, no longer the premier. And President Obama was going on about the challenges in the United States. Very small meeting, kind of a get-to-know-each-other meeting, exchanging views country to country. And Wen Jiabao, you could tell, had heard enough from the United States. And he said, well, wait a minute. How would you like to have this as a challenge? How would you like to be a country of 800 million farmers and be transitioning into a country that only needs 200 million farmers? He said, I have a problem on my hands. He said, I have 600 million redundant farmers, and what to do about them. And indeed, there is a roaming itinerant workforce in inbound number to the city centers. We're talking about Tianjin, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, the big cities along the coast, where you've got inward migration of probably 250 million people over the next decade. Cities of 20 million people will become cities of 40 million people. This thing called urbanization, how do you accommodate that growth? Paying for it all. rounding out the infrastructure, dealing with things like air quality, where you've got serious problems today. And then Xi Jinping looks at the state-owned enterprise situation in China, where you've got maybe 110 mega corporations, their oil, their gas, their telecommunications, their trading, and they control the world in China. They've been able to write their own rules for the better part of 10 years. And he's saying, I've got to break up some of these monopolies. I've got to get them to obey the rules of international trade and engagement. And that means I'm going to have to go against some of the people who basically have put me in power. So state-owned enterprise reform is going to be a huge deal that you're going to hear a lot more about in the years to come. Keep your eyes focused on what Xi Jinping does over the next year with respect to the economics of China. Now, what gives him his power, and how is he able to operate? He has 3 titles. One is the presidency, which is meaningless in China. The other is the head of the Communist Party, which is everything. What is the Communist Party? About 80 million members, organized in about 3,500 outposts across the country. It still remains the critical organizing body within this vast country. And third, he was given the chairmanship of the Central Military Commission right off the bat, which really did solidify his power base sooner than many analysts had thought. So what are the themes that are going to be emerging over the next couple of years that you're going to likely read about? Let me just try a couple on for you. Number one, you're going to be hearing a lot about the anti-corruption campaign led by a man named Wang Qishan, who's a member of the senior standing committee of the Politburo. Wang Qishan being one of the most impressive negotiators I think I've ever dealt with. And you will see some very high-profile people rounded up as part of this anti-corruption campaign for a couple of reasons. One, there is enormous pressure brought about by the people of China toward the government with respect to concern around corruption. And Xi Jinping knows he must move and create some high-profile examples. Secondly, Xi Jinping wants to get some of the old bureaucrats out who were put in by the guy who served before him, and he wants to get his own people in. So we're going to see through this anti-corruption campaign people who were taken out on legitimate corruption charges, and probably some who were kind of reordered based upon Xi Jinping's desire to want to repopulate the bureaucracy, so to speak. Number two, the mass line campaign is what you're going to hear a little bit more about as well. So you remember 1978 under Deng Xiaoping, where China went from class struggle overnight almost to economic expansion. 1978. Well, it's time now for the party, at least based on the view of Xi Jinping, to clean up their act. For party members, party elite, to look in the mirror and to say, if you can't connect, if you can't relate to the people in your region, you've got a problem. We've got to make sure that the high-profile banquets, the big cars, the perks, the red carpet treatment, all goes away. And you've got to be seen as more connected to the people who you represent, the mass line campaign. You'll hear a lot more about that. What will be the challenges that stand before Xi Jinping? Number one, keeping pace with enormously high domestic expectations. Where the people of China today are able to access so much of the rest of the world through social media and the internet, with 700 million internet users and 100 million bloggers in the country, that the expectations are up here. And Xi Jinping is probably only able to deliver here. Income inequality, when you look at the Gini coefficient numbers, becoming off the charts. Pollution, the numbers are such that it becomes a public health issue, and one that scares away the talent and the brain power that China would otherwise like to see attracted to the country. Beyond just the domestic challenges, take a look at the neighborhood. Take a look. So here's the thing that some people don't fully get about the neighborhood in which China resides. You look at the United States, we have two of the most impenetrable borders in the world, the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. We're not going to go to war with Canada anytime soon. I can guarantee you that. It was like being governor of Utah. You know, I never had to declare war once on Idaho. It was a pretty peaceful neighborhood. And we kind of think that everybody kind of exists like that too. You look at China, on the other hand, surrounded by 15 nation states, some of them outright hostile to China's interests. Some of them China has been at war with in recent years. Soviet Union, border skirmishes, 1964. India, border skirmishes, 1962. Vietnam War in 1979. It's a tough neighborhood. And you look at the rise of leaders in Northeast Asia, Korean Peninsula, Japan, Taiwan, the northern tier of China, and you begin to understand how complex the politics, the history, the geographic claims are in this highly important region of the world. Important because probably 50% of our trade, our country, goes right up through the East China Sea and across the Pacific Ocean, and therefore supports jobs and economic expansion for our country. Watch over the next year how Xi Jinping deals with the new Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, who is the grandson of Nobusuke Kishi, a wartime minister in the 1930s, who also helped to administer Manchuria, which of course should already lead you to kind of understand the generational tension when you look at Xi Jinping being the son of Xi Jinping, who was an official during some of those years in the earlier wars against Japan. And then you look at Korea, the new president of South Korea, President Park, who is the daughter of Park Chung-hee, who ran the country between 1961 until his assassination in 1979, whose very mother, President Park, was assassinated by a North Korean agent. And throw in the added dimension of North Korea, now run by a 30-year-old Kim Jong-un, who nobody can seem to make any sense out of, who regularly blows off nuclear weapons and shoots off intermediate-range ballistic missiles into the Sea of Japan. The whole region is going to be in the headlines over the next year and is worthy of your knowledge of investigation. Finally, let me just say, will the economic transformation work? This will be the question. And here's what the leadership in China will have to do to make it work. They will have to convince a very skeptical and cautious and conservative population to take renminbi dollars, their currency, out from under the mattress and begin to invest it in their country. They've just never done that before. There's a very high savings rate, just the opposite of what we have in this country. And the only way that they're going to convince the population of China that now is the time to invest more in their future is by building out social safety nets like retirement and health care and convincing them that the road ahead is predictable and safe, which never has been the case in China's history. So keep your eye on the economic transformation as China makes that move from an investment-led export machine to a consumption machine, building one of the truly powerful middle classes anywhere in the world. But let me just say that the U.S.-China relationship will be impacted, as it has been from the beginning, by technology and by demographics, shifting demographics. So the PIN code of the world today is 1114, meaning that of the planet's 7 billion people, roughly 1 billion live in Europe, 1 billion in the Americas, 1 billion in Africa, and 4 billion in Asia. By 2050, which many of you will be around to participate in, Asia will be up a further 1 billion to 5 billion people total, but then it will stop because birth rates will taper off. And by then, Africa's population will have doubled to 2 billion people. Europe and Americas will roughly stay the same. So by 2100, the world's PIN code will likely be 1145. The global population will peak at 11 billion, with 4 billion living in Africa and 5 billion living in Asia. And by that time, the main maritime thoroughfare of the world won't be the Pacific Ocean like we're discussing today. It will be the Indian Ocean, because that will be the waterway that will link 9 billion of the world's 11 billion inhabitants. So if you're looking for a long-term investment, ladies and gentlemen, I'd recommend some beachfront property in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We have a little bit of time, I understand, for some questions, whatever you have, whatever's on your mind. I don't have all the answers, but I'd be happy to share a few reflections if you'd like.
Is it on? Okay.
Thank you, Governor. Can you comment on the effects of, you briefly touched on it, pollution and the tobacco problem in China? They have a huge tobacco addiction problem in China that may be literally and figuratively dark clouds on their future horizon.
And it's interesting that China, for the first time, is experimenting with some tobacco cessation campaigns, which I never thought I'd live long enough to see. It is a problem, but part of that problem is the fact that, remember we talked about the state-owned enterprises before. Take a look at the tobacco monopoly and the state-owned enterprises behind tobacco, and you'll get a sense of how important that industry has been traditionally, and therefore becomes a very difficult one to kind of break up and make any sense out of. On the air quality side, and I will just tell you, because it was a really interesting moment while serving in Beijing as ambassador, we had an EPA air quality monitor on top of the embassy, and we would tweet out every day the air quality numbers. And it used to really irritate the Chinese bureaucracy. And I'd get called into the foreign ministry, and they'd say, gee, Ambassador, you got to quit putting out those numbers. They're all wrong. You're out there by the Fifth Ring Road in Beijing, and because of that, the pollutant level is higher than is reality. And here are our numbers, which are much different than yours. Well, I was shocked and floored when I read just late last year, that China has now embraced EPA standards for the way in which the PM 2.5, for the way in which they measure and analyze air quality, which suggests to me that air quality has become such a political issue that it's driving change and it's driving policy action. So you're going to see more investment in electric cars. You're going to see more investment in green technologies. You're going to see more and more ring roads that are built out and only certain technologies allowed in the downtown area. This wouldn't be so if it weren't a political issue. But when people take to Weibo and Twitter and start talking about air quality numbers, and when it affects economic development, you can expect China to act. We're going to see some interesting things out of them in the years to come. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Do you believe that the shift from an investment-based to a consumption-based economy will produce profound political shifts given its reliance on a strong middle class? And if so, what will those look like?
Oh, it's a great question. And first of all, I think you have to stop to consider that they've kind of hit an intermediate wage trap in China, where if you want to get wages up, you're just going to have to move toward expanding commerce domestically and enhancing your consumption capacity in your own country, not somewhere else. And you're going to have to break down the low-wage jobs that they've relied on for 30 years. So I think we're going to see a couple of things happen. I think we're going to see movement toward policies that support local innovation, and not indigenous innovation that is protectionist innovation, but broad-based innovation policies.
Good evening, everybody. Hello, thanks for coming out. We're going to start the program in just 1 minute. I have two very